wintry morning or magical midnight, wherever, whenever you may be, across the dimensions or around the vibrations. I'm Tillie Treadwell, and oh, have I got a show for you. Won't you join us on The Weird Walk Home? Welcome, everyone, or welcome back. I'm Tillie Treadwell, and tonight I have with me the Stone Master himself. This is Dennis Stone, actually. He has a fantastic story for us, lots of awesome updates about the American Stonehenge, and maybe there's a book or so in the works. Dennis, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. So nice to see you and hear you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, my pleasure, Dennis. Thank you so very much for joining me. You were recommended by a few friends of mine, and it's so lovely to finally meet you instead of just ping-ponging back some messages. But for people who may not know who you are, could you please give us a brief history of yourself and the American Stonehenge, and we'll take it from there?
Well, first, my name is Stone, so obviously I had to get involved with this place, preordained. But I grew up in New Hampshire, actually, and I was born in 1954. My dad, Robert Stone, is actually the one that got involved with this back then. And it was because of basically what we're doing right now. It was a radio show. And he was a listener. And it was on a Friday night in one of the biggest stations in New England called WBZ Radio. And on that show that evening, there was a conversation. The topic was all about these strange stone ruins in New Hampshire. You never heard of them before. The show started about 7:30 in the evening, and the host was Alton Hall Blackington, a famous New England host, basically, and book writer. And the name of the show is Yankee Yarns. And the name of one of the books I got from him is also called Yankee Yarns. So I was basically 18-month-old when my dad listened to that program. So I kind of grew up with the place. And after my dad heard it on the show that evening, he was blown away because he only lived 7 miles from this place and never heard a word about it. Um, about a week later, he's at the barber shop. I could have been with him, I'm not really sure, but it was in the same town of Derry, 7 miles from where this site is located, and looking at a magazine waiting to have his hair done. As he opened it up, there's a whole feature about the same site that he had never heard about. What a coincidence. That in this time, there's pictures, there's a whole story about it, and the magazine was called New Hampshire Profile by a guy named Hennessy. And it was written actually 3 years before that. So I'd been sitting there for 3 years. And so my dad looked up at the barber working on somebody's hair. He said, "Hey, can I keep this magazine or at least take it home with me?" He goes, "How old is that?" "Well, it's 3 years old." He goes, "Take it." Well, that weekend at my aunt and uncle's house, we used to they all got together and played cards on Saturday nights. They had a lot of friends, probably about 10 people, probably having some beer, and socializing, playing cards. My dad took the magazine out and passed it around to everybody. And they all looked at it, and nobody really knew what it was till it got to my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister and her husband. And when they looked at it, they were quite surprised because 20 years before that, in the 1930s, while they were dating, they would ride their bicycles, not motorcycles, but bicycles, about 10 miles, between 7 and 10 miles down to this place. And they used to picnic up on top of these stone ruins, which kind of blew my dad away. He's like, you never mentioned this before, because they had forgotten about it. So his next question was, "Can you find it?" So that Sunday, I think I stayed with my grandparents, and my dad, my uncle, my mom, and my aunt. They drove around North Salem, New Hampshire, where this is located, about 40 miles north of Boston. There were no signs. It was not open to the public. And they had to go by their memory as to where it was, So they drove around a little bit. Then they spotted an old dirt road off of this road called Havel Road. And they stopped, they just parked the car there on the side of the road. And then all four of them went a half a mile through the woods up a hill. Hopefully this is the place, And after they got up there, the place was there. And because my dad and everybody was pretty impressed by it, surprised by it. There's a big chain link fence that was put around the site that's still there today. The chain link fence was put up by the first archaeologists to protect the site from vandalism, from people going, the curious, people wanting to take souvenirs, kids playing in there. So he put up a 6-foot chain link fence with a barbed wire on top, kind of to really protect the thing. So you're not going to climb over the barbed wire too easily. So he found a hole wherever other people snuck in, and he climbed under, leaving my mom, aunt, and my uncle standing there waiting for about an hour. They're like, "Where is he?" And he's in the ruins. There's a lot of brush and stuff, so they couldn't really see him, the whole time. Eventually, he reappears, climbs under the fence. He's trespassing, of course, and he's pretty excited about it. And they asked what he thought. He says, "This is just simply amazing. I've never seen anything like this, you know." And then he said, "Man, I'd like to get involved with this site somehow. You know, research, study it. I don't know, but this place is incredible. Maybe someday, maybe we could buy it and open it to the public." And because my mom's response at the time was, "You got rocks in your head." She wasn't too crazy about that idea. My dad had been in the Coast Guard before that for a few years up in Labrador, not far from where the Vikings landed. And he was always interested in the past, Native American, Viking, that kind of thing. And he would have visited the site, but he was there about 1951 to 53, so about 7 years before they actually made the Viking discovery. So eventually, what he did is he met the owner of the property, a gentleman named Malcolm Pearson, and Malcolm had inherited the site from the original archaeologist in 1950 when he died. So my dad met him. He lived in Massachusetts, not too far from Worcester. So
Huh.
he actually connected with him, talked to him with all his enthusiasm and all the questions and everything, and back and forth they went with phone calls and then some, in-person meetings. Um, and that went on for a couple of years actually, to about 1957 when they finally settled on a plan to open the place to the public. And my dad would open it up, he would run the business, and Malcolm would lease him the property, basically, you know. And my dad, after the Coast Guard, actually had gone into the AT&T Bell Labs laboratories as an engineer. So he was an electronics engineer. The Coast Guard, they put him through their academy and all that stuff. So he learned a lot about electronics, and that's what he did in the Coast Guard. And then he went into AT&T for the next 30 years. So he worked full time for AT&T Bell Laboratories, and then he also tried to run this, and he was going to college too at the same time and raising a new family. And he hand
Wow.
built our house up in Derry, with my mom's help actually, and some other relatives actually building the house. So it was quite busy at the time. But he did open it up July 15th, 1958. And when it first was opening up, they called it Stone Ruins in New Hampshire. And that's the legal name that the state used. And that's the top of I think you led into it, a new book coming out. And that's where that came from. It was called the Stone Ruins of New Hampshire. They quickly changed the name to Mystery Hill Caves, though. And so we just celebrated our 65th anniversary. I've always been a part of the place. When I was a kid, I played around the place a lot with all our friends, you know. And then I get a little bit older, I started putting bumper stickers on the cars in the late 1960s, 68, 69. And then in 1970, I became a guide there to talk to people, guide them around, school groups, and all of that. I later went into my passion was flying. So I went into the airlines and I flew for 42 years, and I ended my career in 2016 with American Airlines. And you have to retire at 65. That's the FAA requirement. So I actually retired a little bit earlier than that. And I decided when I retired, what am I going to do, because you don't want to do
Sure.
nothing. Well, I knew I
Yeah.
had the museum, and I didn't think I'd get too bored, but I never realized how much different. It came a lot different than I thought. The retirement. I do miss flying, but we started finding all sorts of interesting features on the hill that my dad never saw, nor all the researchers going back 87 years. That's when the research began. And some of these things we can get into, and that's one of the reasons for the book. We needed a lot of updates with a lot of new finds, and it's not just myself, but other people are finding these same kind of features from here out to a town called Weed, California, near Mount Shasta. Similar
Okay.
stonework, similar features, and right across in between, like in up in Canada, in Ontario, Canada, up near let's see, in Denver, just east of Denver, all sorts of similar features, but all across the landscape, not just the greater Northeast. When my dad got involved, they only knew about 2 dozen sites that had some similar features to ours across New England, New York, Pennsylvania. The number now and it's a bigger area actually. I mentioned all the way up to California, but really the stone chambers and structures and everything, they go from Ontario, Canada, right down to Virginia. And there's
Oh,
about 800 sites. And a site could be like ours with 110 acres of features, stone features. It could be just the town that has one stone structure. Uh, there's also a town in Connecticut we learned about in 2016, the year of my retirement. It blew me away. The whole book came out. The author writes for Yankee Magazine, a popular book up here. It's like Southern Living kind of
Okay.
book
Yeah.
magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a freelance writer. He writes about New England fishing villages, and he's been writing for decades. But he wrote a book about his own town, about all these stone structures. And we knew Connecticut had a lot of these chambers all over the state. Never knew about North Stonington, Connecticut, though. I knew it was there, but when I picked up the book at a um, archaeological meeting, it was a 3-day meeting in Groton, Connecticut, near the Navy base, actually, not far from where my dad went to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, actually. We were down there for one day of the 3-day meeting, and one of that author spoke, and I picked up his book beforehand. They had a author's table, you could buy books, and I'm looking at the back cover, and it says 8,000 structures, 25 categories of structures, and 270 photographs. I'm like, this is interesting. This must be the whole
Wow.
Northeast. As it
Uh-huh.
turns out, he was writing about one town of North Stonington, and there's over 8,000 structures built there. These are stone structures that have a strong resemblance to what we have over 110 acres, but covering 35,000 acres.
Okay.
And and some of the features in there, the 25 categories of features, were amazing because a couple of them were the ones that I just started finding in 2016 in my retirement. I had no frame of reference. I had never seen some of these features before, or heard about them, or read about them, or talked about them with other researchers. And
Sure.
yet there they were, every one of them in his book. And I was like, wow. Then he spoke, and it was just amazing what he had to say. After he spoke, there was a break. I talked to his wife. He was pretty much surrounded by people, and his wife had people talking with her. But I got a chance to talk to her, and I invited him up to our site. They have been up a couple of times. But after they got done speaking, a woman from Denver spoke with her 2 male colleagues, and they did it by Skype. So there's about 100 people in the meeting. So after the meeting, they would let you speak on Skype, but it was kind of difficult. I wanted to talk to one-on-one in person. But she starts showing her same kind of features we have in just east of Denver, where it's very flat below Nebraska. There's a county or two there she mentioned, and the same set of stonework out there. If you go back to my dad when he first got involved, there is a little bit today of skepticism, questions. Why are these stone ruins here? Were they built by farmers in the last couple hundred years?
Mhm.
What's the nature of them? Why would anybody
Well,
build something like this site?
that leads into my question, which is my channel, it's based around the paranormal. And I've heard, like you mentioned, Mount Shasta, and all of these other mysterious features. Do you think that there's any possibility that these were built by like the Fae or the old gods or anything of that nature? Or what is your theory? Who do you think created these fabulous features?
Yeah, there's so many different theories and ideas. Um, in fact, in my book, we kind of address a little bit about that, especially back in the beginning when the first researcher started. His thought was that it was a Viking settlement, part of the
Oh,
Icelandic sagas, the Greenland sagas, and Eric saga. And so he thought it was a Viking settlement, but as they began removing the brush and debris, you really could get a good grasp of what the site looked like. Before that, it was so covered with everything, it was hard to make it out.
mhm,
Learning that the Vikings really, for the most part, built sod houses and sod villages. They
yeah.
had sod for the walls, and then they built a wooden with a thatched roof. In fact, we were just up at Lonzo Meadow last summer for the first time, right near where my dad was stationed with the Coast Guard. And
Okay.
that's the first Viking settlement. And it was found in about 1960. It was proven in 61 to be a Viking settlement. And everybody was like, wow, they actually proved the Vikings made it to North America. And we visited that site and a site next to it, a recreation called Norstead. And when you look at that, it doesn't look like our site. It's sod, it's thatched roofs, wooden timbers that hold it up, a whole different feeling, look, and material. It's not the same. So he eventually changed his idea to the Irish Celtic monks actually leaving Ireland, and they were persecuted by the Vikings starting around 783 AD and the
Mhm.
Lindisfarne invasion in England when the Vikings started raiding like a blitzkrieg through Europe. The Danes came down, the Norwegians kind of went more west. And then the Swedes actually went into Russia. They say Russia gets its name from the Rush, which is a group of Swedes. So the name actually Sweden, kind of interesting. But the Vikings eventually made it from the Middle East all the way across the Mediterranean into Europe, all the way across to Iceland, Greenland, And part of that, as they moved west, I think the Irish called the monks, and they still have to kind of prove this. They need some really hard evidence, but the Irish called the monk in the legends were always just ahead of the Vikings, trying to stay away from them from Iceland towards Greenland, towards Canada. So he began to think that our site, as well as some other sites that he knew of in the 30s, they knew of 16 sites by 1946 when he wrote his book. That was the first archaeologist named William Goodwin. So his idea was Irish colony monks, and they were trying to, seek a, refuge, I guess, from the Vikings, and they built it inland from the Atlantic Ocean. And so he died in 1950, still believing that. And he wrote several books: The Truth of Leif Erikson. He wrote about the Spanish gold down in Jamaica, and he wrote Ruins of Great Ireland in New England in 1946, which is focusing on our site, but 15 other sites too. So that was
Okay.
really the first. Yeah. So that kind of thing about ancient old world voyages. And we do know Native Americans have been on now recently in New Hampshire. The evidence now in New Hampshire for Native Americans, it's amazing. It went back as far as 13,000 years. That's the glaciers are still here. They had to somehow survive with that kind of environment. Imagine that, it was probably starting to melt, but that I took a course in archaeology, and the gentleman was the president of New Hampshire and Massachusetts Archaeological Societies. And at Phillips Andover, that prestigious school, he was the curator of their museum, the Peabody Museum there. And he took us into the museum and showed us all around. My wife was invited. And my dad knew him, and he actually did some work on our site too. But he said during that time when the glaciers were leaving, it was a barren landscape like the moon or like Mars. It was pretty bad. The winds were howling. Not much was growing, if anything whatsoever. Fish weren't in the ponds. There was no ant. What were you going to eat? But yet they were here 13,000 years. So Native Americans have been here. And then the idea is they weren't known to build stone ruins like this, though. That's the big thing, So a lot, and they may have. We know out west they were building amazing things in the Southwest, in the Midwest, right across pretty much a good part of the North American continent. They were building things. So if they were builders of this, somehow our scholars, our academics, um, you know, people in that, as well as scholars, archaeologists that are working on this, and historians too, have missed the point that Native Americans are involved with stonework, particularly in the Northeast, all of the Northeast, and yet they weren't
Yeah.
supposed to do that. There aren't supposed to be any stone ruins that are pre-colonial in the Northeast. That's pretty much what we've been told. They shouldn't exist. And
So
that's
spoiler alert to the rest of my audience. Apparently no paranormal activity was involved in making these structures. Would you agree?
well, I'll tell you, maybe they might be interested in that, but that doesn't mean that the site might not have paranormal going on with it,
Very true.
because we go back to 1970 and Hans Holzer, and some people consider him the father of the paranormal. He's from Austria, came to the New World, got a doctorate in psychology, I think, but he got involved with the paranormal very early on. And in 2020 through 22, the Holzer Files on the Travel Channel, Discovery Network, created
Oh,
that show. And it ran for 2 seasons. His daughter, Alexandra, was part of that, his youngest daughter. But Hans started visiting us in 1970, 71, 72, and it was great because he used to film everything with a movie camera and record everything. And by 1974, he brought up 3 different psychics: Ethel Myers, Nancy Abel, and the other one was trying to think of her name right now. She's another one, Ingrid Beckman. Ingrid Beck. She was fairly new at it. My mom picked him up at the airport in Manchester, New Hampshire. They had flown in from New York City. They came up at 3 different times during the course of 74. So he kept coming back and forth. And on the November 12th, I think it was November 12th, 1974, he brought in Ethel Myers. And she was the most senior one. She was pretty well known in the circles. She must have died years ago, I'm sure. She was pretty elderly when she came in. She was wonderful to meet. But because she came in, Betty Hill, the Bonnie and Betty Hill
yes.
abduction. Now, we didn't have internet back then, but it must have been in the papers because Betty was living in Portsmouth. She grew up in Portsmouth's about 35 miles from ours, but halfway is Kingston, New Hampshire, and that's where she grew up and everything.
Okay.
And her mother was still living there. So in 1974, Betty heard about Hans coming in. She also heard about Ethel Myers. And she came in, she met all of us. She brought a little gray head. and I got pictures of all of that. In fact, I can maybe send you up if I think of it. I have them on my screenshots. And she came in to get a reading by Ethel Myers. And I was kind of amazed by that, and I got to meet her, and she became a friend of my mom's for the next 30 years. I was heading to Logan Airport, I think 20 years ago, for another 4-day trip. I was based there at the time. And on the way down, it was either Art Bell or George Norrie on the coast to coast. It was really early in the morning because I think they go like, I've been on George's show before. I know it's really
Right.
in the middle of the night. And
Right.
it could have been George, but whoever it was is a good friend. I have some very sad news. Our good friend Betty Hill passed away this morning. That's how I heard it on the Coast to Coast
Yeah.
show, you know.
Yeah.
So we were friends with Betty Hill for all those years. And then when Hans came back, 1976, he actually did Leonard Nimoy's show. He produced it called the In Search of, and we were the number two second show of that series. It ran for like 7 years, 144 episodes with Leonard Nimoy, Spock, which was one of my heroes back in the 60s on the original Star Trek. He did a whole show, but Hans Holzer directed the whole thing. He was the producer or whatever of that episode. I had forgotten that. I was there when he did it. I was there for the days you were doing that and shooting that and everything. But I had forgotten it until they did the show in 2020. I'm like, that's right, he was there for that, you know. And he's actually the one that produced that episode. So
That's
yeah,
all.
we
I've
have a book.
actually watched that show.
Oh, did you watch it?
I have. I've seen, well, not your episode, but I have seen a
Oh
few of
yeah,
those episodes in the past.
yeah. Well, for your listeners, it would be the second season. I think it was called Ancient Evil, and it was I think it was episode. I'm going to say Lucky 13. It might have been 14. I think it comes up differently every time I pull it off. Discovery Channel or Discovery
Okay.
Network. It's a travel channel though, and it's still being streamed. It's in their archives and everything like that.
Yeah.
You know, and it had a 2-year run. But I talked to Alexander occasionally. I never met her back in the 70s. She was very young. She had an older sister too, who may have come up, but I don't remember her either. But I asked her about that. I said, your dad had extensive files, recordings, and all this filming he did. Did he record uh, Ethel Myers giving a reading for Betty Hill? Probably about the UFO experience, perhaps. I'm not sure if that's where it went. I think it was done in, we had a little office in the front of our visitor center. It's no longer there. It's part of our artifact room. It's all opened up now because we redid everything 30 years ago. But I think they might have done it in there. And she said, you know what? I'm going to look for that. But my dad's stuff's very, very extensive to find that, you know. So, but she says, like I am going through all my dad's archives. We're actually taking all his files, scanning them, putting them on the cloud. Because if anything ever happened to the visitor center, there's stuff there that's like, you know, we only have copies of going back to
Absolutely.
1900 actually on the site. So she's doing the same thing with her dad too. And I think she's trying to produce a new show. That show ran 2 years, a Holzer Files. And then the host of that, I did his show. He's a host, radio host, David Schrader. And I did his show a couple of years
Yeah.
before that. And then we did the show with him. He was wonderful. And now he's doing something new on Travel Channel. It's a new paranormal show. I think it was out in
Yeah.
Bozeman or somewhere out in that area. Yeah, David Schrader.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but so that was a lot of fun. So we have had a number of psychics, and every fall we've had people coming in. And on March 23rd, we're having a special event, and we have one of the psychics that's kind of big in the New England area. And I haven't met him yet, but he was a friend of another gentleman that did an event at our place on Halloween of 22 with Scott Walters, Haley Ramsey, and a couple other people. And so this gentleman called up and said, I couldn't make it to the last one when you guys did it on Halloween of 22. He was supposed to attend because he had somebody missing in his family. I'll have to find out what happened with that. It was some sort of drama, you know, like somebody's missing in my family. It was a strange thing, you know, one of those sounds like something bad happened. But so we'll have something on this year on the 23rd, and we have Ronnie LeBlanc, and he's the Expedition Bigfoot host. I've done an event with him 5 years ago, but he's going to join us. Scott Walters again, and was not only on History Channel for a couple of years and on Travel Channel too with America on Earth, but he's on Gaia TV doing a show now, some sort of show. I don't get Gaia, so I'm not sure, but he's doing a show too. But we will have a paranormal, skywatching, UFO event, and I think Ronnie's going to be leading some of that too. Ronnie LeBlanc's going to be in. So that's kind of cool. It should be a lot of fun that night. It's going to be all day from sunrise. Actually, it's a few days after the equinox, but it's still fairly close to watch that and observe that all the way till probably about 10 o'clock at night. It's going to be a long day. So
That sounds incredible. That's a party. I like that.
Exactly. That's what
Oh,
it'll be, we're going to have a lot of fun. And I'm sure Tuesday, the next day, we're going to regret all of we did the day before, because it's going
oh,
to be
sure.
yeah. But it'll be paranormal and it'll be, anything to do with paranormal, UFO. And I think that gentleman will be more to do with one of the things we have found
Mhm.
and is these windows. And these windows were found in 2016, the very first one. The other thing I found that year was serpentine shaped walls, shaped like a serpent. They look like a snake with a head, body, and tail. But the windows were also found at the same time, right after we retired. And we found a couple like, what are these beautiful linteled windows with a lintel, a sill, vertical walls of various size, but they're in the stone walls near the bottom, near the top. And we started finding more and more. And my dad was out in the woods looking at these. He used to take an oculastronomer from Penn State, a doctor of oculastronomy, joined us in the late 90s. And he would drive up in his Mercedes and he was doing research on the solar alignments, the lunar alignments, and 24 star alignments that we found doing survey work in the 70s. That data from the survey went to the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, came back and said, you have 24 star alignments with this site. We're like, wow, what? We knew we had the alignments with the solstices and equinoxes and what we call cross quarter days. And then the moon goes through an 18.5 year cycle. We weren't aware we had those star alignments. So he was working on that. But he was also out looking at the stone walls covering the 110 acres. They never noticed the serpentine shape and they never noticed the windows. And they both had their eyes wide open. And that's true of everybody, including me. But it just
Uh-huh.
happened one day I was riding through the woods and I happened to look and I saw a wall that looked peculiar. I had seen it thousands of times because my dad actually lived on that particular wood road at the end of it on separate property. And I'd ride my ATV or snowmobile and I got off, walked over to it. I looked at it and said, it's on a ridge of bedrock. Looks like a head. It tapers down to a flat stone. I thought, rattlesnake, what is this thing? Am I looking at a serpent or is it just pareidolia? You see faces in clouds kind of thing, your imagination. But I'm
Sure.
looking at it very carefully. I think this is intentional. I know what New England walls look like, For your listeners, New England has about 240,000 miles of historic walls built during the colonial period, post-colonial. Farmers would clear fields to get rid of the rocks so they wouldn't plow them. Every year hit the plows on them, and every year the frost pushes up new crop of rocks, and they have to get rid of them.
Mhm.
But there were also boundaries between properties, and they also were stock fences in some cases. So they kind of formed three different things, whether it was just to clear the field, stock fence, or boundary, or all three. But the walls are all over the Northeast, and we have the most of anywhere in the world, they say. I've been to Ireland. I thought they had a lot over there. But these walls on our property look different. They're not so straight. Farmers' walls are fairly straight with exceptions, but these walls, they turn, they twist, they bend. And they have big slabs of stone that are stood on their end. They have stones that are stood up like monoliths. They're like gigantic arrowheads. And then
Right.
some of them had a couple little niches we knew, and those are kind of like a little chamber built into the wall, but with a back wall. And what I started finding is these windows you can see through. And now, in the last 6 years, we have 26 of them, we think. And some have stone shutters. My friend Maria Wheatley is into a lot of the sites all over the world, actually. She lives near Stonehenge. She takes people to Egypt, Malta, Sedona. She's going to be at Chaco Canyon this year. And she's
Oh.
really big into dowsing and
Mhm.
spiritualism, earth
Oh, okay.
energy, big on
Yeah.
that. She's one of, yeah. In fact, Patrick Stewart was in a picture with her at one of the megaliths, and Megan Fox actually had a 1 year show on history all about ancient sites, and Maria was one of her guests. But Maria is actually now, she says she's on a Hollywood film, and she hopes she doesn't end up on the cutting floor, but they're going to show some of her data and some of her material. I was just talking with her yesterday. What they call them over there, and she does podcasts too. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I've done a couple podcasts with her, and she said, "Stay on the show afterwards," like we mentioned, earlier. And what she
Sure.
showed me in Dartmoor, England, is the same thing we have at our site. These windows, and they're called spirit holes, and they're either energy points or where the spirit could flow, according to what they know in England. After we found the first couple of what we always call them like soul holes or
Soul hole.
spirit windows, that kind of
That's
thing.
what it told me. Soul hole.
Soul hole, right? It rhymes. It sounds good.
Yeah.
It actually comes off the
Yeah.
tongue. Well, I after we saw a few of those, when I again go back to Markham Starr's book, in 2016 down in Connecticut, looking through it, one of the 25 categories of these windows, and they have them down there. I'm like, my God, that's the same thing. As I'm going through the book a little further, he starts showing some of the 400 serpentine walls located in that one town. The walls range anywhere from 30 feet up to 300 feet. The average is around 100 feet. Some are straight or linear. Some have a head that's kind of 90-degree to the body. Sometimes the tail is 90-degree to the tail. Sometimes it might be a double head, and they say that's symbolic of equinox, I've been told. I don't understand that completely.
Right.
Some of them actually loop around, and this is a little bit more towards now. I found that out probably in 2019, I think, a couple of years later, that we might have three Ouroboroses, and where a serpent's biting its tail. So the wall comes around, and actually right in front of the tail, where the mouth is, the tail is. Sometimes Ouroboros, when you look at artwork from the old world, you'll see the snake biting the tail. It's inside the mouth. Sometimes it's just nibbling on the side of it. I
Yes,
have
yes.
seen Native American artwork too, with the snakes and the tails and everything like that. So it could be, depending on the culture, it might be wisdom. It could be infinity, the circle of life. I think it has different meanings. And at our site, the biggest one we have, the wall we GPSed it, I think in I'm going to say 2017, actually, we were on to that particular one because we have two others also. 2,550 feet. It goes around counterclockwise after it leaves its head. It comes back in front of its mouth, and then there's one hump just before the mouth, and then a 90-degree twist with a pointed tail. We've been looking at that since we opened in 58. My aunt and uncle were there in the 30s. The first researcher looked at that chamber. Nobody until 2016 actually noticed. It might 2016, 2017. I think that's when we found that. We have it in the paperwork. It'll be in my book, the actual date. But I think it was 17 now. We actually looked at that and we're like, wow, I think we have a serpent biting its mouth, and it surrounds the entire site. It
Wow.
contains all the astronomical marker stones. When you have an alignment, you need 2 points to really have an alignment. 1 point won't do it. So if you have just a stone standing out there, standing up, you have to have something else to align with it, another stone, to make a solstice equinox. It's like a gun sight looking at it. Well,
Yeah.
all of those distant markers are called foresights. The one closest to you is called the
Uh-huh.
back sight. All of the ones that are out, the foresights, are all part of that body of that possible. I say possible because we can't talk to the builders. 2,550 foot.
Right.
It's twice as long as the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which we visited in June. That's 1,350, and that's supposed to be the biggest snake effigy in the world. I would
Yeah.
say it's the biggest earthen one, and we might have, and I say might again, I think we have the biggest snake effigy anywhere, perhaps. Now, maybe somebody will find one 3,000 feet long, but 2,550 feet long. And I think the area inside of it is the sacred area surrounding that special area, and that's where the main site is located, where most of these structures are. So we have 14 serpent walls, we think now, and some are straight, some are S-shaped, some are kind of like 90-degree heads and tails. Some have big stones, like a boulder right in the middle of the body, and then the stone wall on either side of it with a head and tail. That is a possible, and there's a couple of repeating patterns of that, not only at our site, but in Connecticut, the Hudson Valley, the Berkshires of Massachusetts. They think that's either a pregnant snake or the snake ate its lunch. So it might represent it ate something. We're not sure of that yet.
Yeah.
So they're all over the hill, our hill, and yet in North Stonington, Connecticut, over that town of 35,000 acres, there's 400 of these things. And some of them contain the windows. We're not sure the correlation of these windows, these beautiful windows, to the serpent yet. I would say most of our windows we have found seem to be serpentine walls. There's a couple walls we're looking at. We have these windows. Sometimes there might be two windows together, side by side. We have two that are two windows and two windows. The same thing I have on my screenshot is one in Connecticut near North Stonington. I think it's the next town over. It's just a wall that runs about 15 feet. The only thing in it are these four beautiful windows. Some of the windows at our site have stone shutters. They actually could be open and closed. Some of the shutters are actually in situ. They're actually stacked one over the other. That particular window was found when we were filmed for Ancient Aliens in
Okay.
2019.
Yes.
They had filmed some of the Hudson Valley chambers, it was Hugh Newman and David Childress. They both been to our site. David
Right.
is very well known, and then Hugh is from England, and his friend Andrew Collins. They've been to our site too. I talk to Andrew once in a while. Gobekli Tepe over in Turkey, the oldest 12,000-year-old ruins. Andrew's a wonderful guy, and Hugh's nice too. I don't talk to Hugh that much, but they did that particular episode about ancient druids, I think it was, and they showed the Hudson Valley, a couple of the 500 sites, like two or three of them, and then they went to Gunjiwamp in Connecticut, which is that is near where that lecture was, where I saw the speakers, and that site's been known about way back in 1654. A gentleman named John Pynchon wrote to Governor Winthrop II and said, "What are these stone ruins here?" He called it like a stone fort. This is 370 years ago. They're asking the question of who built it then. And yet, if you talk to some mainstream archaeologists and historians, all these things were all built by a bunch of crazy farmers 200 or 300 years ago. Yet in 1654, here's a letter. We have the whole letter written to that, governor, the second, he was a junior, and asking the question of what is this place down there?
Right.
So, and some of the serpentine walls are being found in that particular site called Gunjiwamp. Um, After we found that they're in the Northeast, a gentleman from Alabama, Jacksonville State University, Dr. Harry Holstein, Dr. Little from Memphis, he's involved with all the mounds out west. He's also friends of Andrew and Hugh and David Childress and all of these guys. I communicate, he's been to our site too. And I said, I was mentioning our survey, he says, contact this guy in Alabama. So I contact him, and he's got a 40 square mile area with standing monoliths, cairns, gigantic, but really on a big scale. But what he has down there too is what he calls rattlesnake walls. He's been working on them since the 70s.
I've heard
So we got a
that
whole,
somewhere.
you heard
That
that too.
that sounds really familiar. I have heard that specific term somewhere on Facebook, but I can't put my name or
I
my
hate, I
exactly
know
where.
that is so cool you heard that.
Yeah,
Because in America, a lot of this is just totally unknown to the public,
it
totally.
is. It
I
is.
mean, listeners hearing us tonight may have heard something of our site, but for the most part, I think probably a high percentage are not aware that our site exists, nor the other 800 sites across the whole Northeast. But these other features, such as the serpent walls, and also we have wall pattern at our site, looks like the letter D. And
Mm,
I noticed it when I built the diorama of our site in 1977 while I was still in college. I built a three-dimensional model. And then when you walk into our visitor center today, you can see it has some of the walls, the
mm.
astronomical alignments, the main site. It has some of the quarried stones. We just updated it 2 years ago and added all the serpentine walls, in Windows 2. And so it's just amazing what's still being found and everything, all these different things that are being located and discovered. Uh, I will say the last window I found was just about 2 months ago. And I was just out doing some clearing, taking some firewood home, and I looked at a wall and I'm like, I'd never seen that feature. And I looked at it closer and I think it's another, I haven't listed that one yet, but it's another window. But these things, again, they're existing all over the landscape, all over the Northeast. But when the History Channel was filming, they were actually complete for the day. They sent up a cameraman. He was a freelance, and he was walking back with our assistant archaeologist. He had been there that day, and we're kind of guiding him around a little bit, and then we let him just shoot B-roll on the site. And then we went back up to see how he was doing, and he was just wrapping it up, pulling all his cameras and everything away. He had drones and everything, and so we helped him back down. And as we're walking, my assistant archaeologist, he looked over and he goes, "Dennis, I think you got another window there." And the guy was standing there as a witness. And this window again, it kind of has like Venetian blinds all stacked up and down, and they're all loose in there. That's a separate type of shutter. The other shutters go vertical, and that same assistant archaeologist around that same time, when I was showing him my four windows together, I discovered one. My son said, "Hey, there's two more on the right side, and then behind the brush, and then on the left side." He goes, "Hey, there's a stone standing there. It looks, Dennis." And this guy's a stonemason. He's a landscape architect. He went to the University of Boulder to get his degree. He's been doing it since the late 80s, and he's been with us for about 12 years, but he's been in archaeology for about 30 something years. So he's very knowledgeable. His eyes are always going, and he's very perceptive. But he can look at something and really look at it very closely. He's really good about that. He goes, I think that rock there belongs inside of that hole, that window. It was stuck in the ground vertically, and all you could see is maybe 2/3 of the stone. It was stuck right adjacent to the window. Normally, in an archaeological site, you try not to disturb them, move things, try to keep them as untouched as possible to try to
Yeah.
preserve them. And that's what we try to do today. In the past, there's a lot of building, rebuilding, and that kind of thing. Not at all, only at our site, but all across the nation. Mesa Verde, we've been all over there, and you see what it used to look like to what it looks like today, even over in Europe. Some of the sites you see today, even Stonehenge has been partially restored up. I got pictures of Stonehenge with big cranes lifting up the stones. But we try to do that. We try to leave it as much untouched as possible. And but this, I said, why don't we try to see if it fits in there? This is an experiment. It's research. So he took it carefully, pulled it out of the ground. It did come out. And then he took it and put it right in front of the window, and then he pushed it and it fit perfectly. And the thing is, we found the other couple of windows, there seems to be similar stones lying kind of in front of them. So a thought is, we think that they were used to close up the window. I did a radio show out of Indiana, and the woman was a doctor. She was an MD. Her show was usually health, medicine and that kind of thing. She goes, but she wanted to broaden her horizons. So she wanted to get into more things, kind of like I think, you were mentioning.
Yeah.
She goes, I was in Dallas as a nurse at a Catholic hospital. She goes, and often when a patient was dying, the family would gather, of course, and sometimes they'd ask me to come in, and I had the key to the windows so we could lock the windows for security. We didn't want patients falling out. She goes, they'd actually bring me into the room. I'd take the key and open the window, and that was to let the spirit pass. And I had
Oh,
never heard of that. I mentioned to my wife, because she grew up in a Catholic, school. She went through Catholic high school and junior high and elementary. And she goes, yes. She goes, it's not a Catholic thing though, but I have heard of that. It's to let the
even
spirit
I have
flow.
heard of that in other you could say cultures and religions, and it is something even within my own spirituality that I do
Yeah,
believe I have experienced. So
that
I
is so
find
cool.
that fascinating. Yeah.
I will
You know,
send you some photographs of those windows, since I don't know if I sent those to you. If I haven't, I'll try to send you a couple.
please do. I would sincerely love to see them. And speaking of soul holes and spirit departing, have you ever, or anyone close to you, have you all ever had any paranormal or ufological or spiritual experiences there at the American Stonehenge?
And for that, the most recent one would be on the Holzer files. The Alexandra, the daughter of Hans, used her father's camera, and during the shooting of that, they were there for 5 nights, right through sunrise, shooting all week. They reveal on to me on Friday. I talked to them on Monday when they first did the first part of the shooting, and then at the end, the kind of conclusion wrap up, and
Yeah.
that was done inside the visitor center, and then they revealed to me what they found. And in the largest chamber there on the main site, it's called the Oracle Chamber, and they were filming it from. It's kind of a north-south structure with the east wing, shaped like the letter Y if you were looking down at it. It's the biggest chamber still intact. And when they were filming towards the front, Alexander and the other David Schrader and there was a couple other people too with them. There were other assistants, and what they caught on camera, I mean, when they showed it to me in the reveal, it was a silhouette of a person standing in the doorway, and it almost freaked me out because first I didn't see it. Your eyes don't see things sometimes, and I'm
Right.
looking at him like, and it kind of startled me because it looked just like a human being, but all it was like a black, like a profile silhouette. And that was on her dad's camera. It was taken that night during the filming because I wasn't there. They kept us out of the rest of it. Monday they film me. It's like, stay away from the cast. We don't want you influencing them, contaminating them.
Sure. Mhm.
And then they used the building all night. And then in the morning, they were just about ready to go. We'd be coming to work. I leave them at 10 at night because we had supper together. But other than that, they didn't want us communicating, kind of like we don't want you to tell them about the site. Let them,
Yes.
yeah. And actually, one of the four hosts is David, and then there's I'm trying to remember her name, but I think of her name, Kozar. I think of her first name. She's actually from New Hampshire. She lived up about 70 miles north of here, lived her life in New Hampshire. She's in Colorado now. She told me because they weren't supposed to say much, but she said, "Hi, Dennis. So Koza." She goes, one of the hosts, because I knew that, and she goes, "I've been in New Hampshire, because I'm in Colorado living now, but she grew up in New Hampshire, never heard of this place, which is so true of people, you know. But she had on that on that particular episode, she had her own experiences. I don't know all the technical terms, but she experienced something, and that comes out on that show. So you'll
Okay.
see Alexander's image. There's also the sound. They had what is it called, EMT, whatever, the electronic, whatever
See?
it is. Yes, they actually have, and they identified what it was saying. But it was 4 years ago that I saw the show last. I think
Okay.
actually 2021 they aired it. But actually, there's a voice that comes out and it speaks too. So they have both audio, they have visual, and they have by the psychic talking about what she experienced too.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it was kind of interesting. And then David Schrader has his own input too on that particular episode. But Hans Holzer in 1992 wrote Long Before Columbus, on Columbus's 500th anniversary. And in that book, in the copies, I think you can get it on probably Amazon or whatever. It talks all about the site, but it talks all about the experiences by those psychics that I mentioned. Actually, there were four of them. The fourth one I can't remember, came in a different year, but Hans came over a number of years, you know, and he was just very intrigued by the site. But then he goes all around the country and he did these places in California, all over the place, famous places that are haunted, that kind of thing, you know. But 1992, the book Long Before Columbus was all about our site and his experience over the, you know, from 1970 up to that point. You know, he died in '09, the same year my dad did, so he wasn't around to experience his TV show. You know.
Yes, yes. Well, that is magnificent. And about your book, can you please tell us more about the book that's coming soon?
Yeah, yeah, it should be out by. We're hoping we have a deadline of the equinox. My wife and James were plotting behind my back because this has been going on for 5 years, and that was wonderful. They did that last week, right after we got back from Florida on our vacation, and they said, "Look, we want to have that book finished now." So, and it's coming together so quickly. I think maybe the end of this month we'll have it ready, and then we'll use the same people we use for our you know, a souvenir book, you know. It'll be a 6x9 format. The name of it will be the Stone Ruins of New Hampshire, which I mentioned was the original name, the business name of the place. And it'll have American Stonehenge below it. And then it'll have my name and then my daughter-in-law and James, who did the editing. The book will, you know, basically pick up from the very beginning with the Ice Age all the way up to present, and we'll talk about the research over the years, and then we'll go through the different eras, you know, with the researchers in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you know,
Nice.
and all the new technologies, because we just did a DNA test on some bones that were found in 1937 or 38 by Mr. Goodwin. They went to the Smithsonian in 1968, and a woman, she was a professor of physical anthropology, and she looked at them and she said, these three bones, and they came, Goodwin found them on the main site. She goes, my best guess, 1968 without DNA, these are human. She looked at the hardness of the bone, the density of the bone, the shape of the bones, and they're tiny little bones. There are three of them, and they're found together. So they came back from the Smithsonian in 1968. They made it into the local papers. They made it into a journal called the New England Antiquities Research Association. It's a group my dad started in '64, and it's still going. They're having their 60th anniversary. So I made it into you know, different papers and stuff about human bones found on the site. Now it's pretty cool. Bones in New England usually dissolve in a few hundred years due to the acidity, the weather conditions, you know.
Oh,
But these, you know, we weren't sure, you know, if they're human or animal, but she felt human, you know. They
oh,
sat
wow.
into, it's pretty cool, yeah. So they sat for 55 years, and I have a friend that lives in Malibu, and he's involved with research all over the world, particularly the Paracas skulls down in South America, those oddly shaped skulls. And he did the DNA on those too. And he writes books, he does podcasts, TV, and all of that.
Sure.
And he's been to our site many times. It's L.A. Missouli. He's a friend. He he said, "Hey, let's get those things DNA." So we used his laboratory. It was up in Thunder Bay, Canada, and Lakefront, I think is the name of it. And we sent them up almost a year ago. It took a couple months to get the results back. But of the three, we decided to send two, keep one in safekeeping. They had to go through customs and they had to be shipped separately. But what happened if we lose both of those in the mail, you know? So we kept one, you know. Well, the both
Yeah.
of them made it up there, and the results were that they were related. They were also after looking at 39,500 different human beings, the types, the makeup and all, they turn out to be Greek ancestry. Like what? We don't know of anybody historically up there with a Greek name, but we know the Patty family that goes back to 1734. They're from England. Maybe some family member had, but apparently it was a Greek, not just like a mix, but it was a Greek ancestry. It's like, well, that's interesting. What are they doing on our site, laying there, decomposing all those years, especially where the other family was there for quite a while, living on the top of the hill. I
Absolutely.
mean,
Well, and if I do have to say, we are running out of time, but if people want to keep up with your adventures
yeah.
and the adventures of the American Stonehenge, how can they do that?
Well, we have a website. It's stonehengeusa.com. If they go to
Okay.
stonehengeusa.com, they got a phone number they can contact us. There's an email in there. There's other
Okay.
links. And we do TikTok videos. We put out these little mini ones. We did about 100 of them. So in TikTok, we're on
Okay.
that. We're on Facebook, Instagram. And but if they go to a website too, the cool thing about that is they can pull down an 11-minute video that we show in our theater, but it's on the website. We have a free app download, mobile. If they put the mobile app on their phone or tablet or whatever, they can do a complete virtual tour of our site. It's all free, and we've been doing it for about 5 years now. They can actually do a complete in anywhere in the world. They can do a complete virtual tour and see what the site's all about.
Mhm.
If they can't get there ever, that's cool. If they can come, that's good. And if they come and use it as you're walking, it talks to you, pictures and text. And we also have a paper one. We've been using those since the 60s, to take people around. But we're located in Salem, New Hampshire, and we're about 40 miles north of Boston in southern New Hampshire. Easy access from either Boston Airport or Manchester Airport, and we're open every day but Christmas and Thanksgiving. So we're there pretty much all the time.
All right. Well, there we have it, my friends. A little bit of the paranormal, a little bit of the historical, and lots of fun tales from Mr. Dennis Stone himself. Until next time, everyone, I have been Tilly Treadwell. This has been Dennis Stone. We wish you a merry morning or a magical midnight until next time.